In the year 1859, British writer Charles Dickens penned a novel that's one of, I guess, his signature work in a way. Associated with him, well read, still around, those kind of things. It's called A Tale of Two Cities. You may have been subjected to it or some part of it during your formal education. And he's speaking here of the two cities of London and Paris. I want to read you a paragraph that begins this book. Mr. Dickens wrote this: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of Mr. Dickens should have written this in Southernese, the epoch of incredulity. In other words, not believing things. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received." Now that was 150, 60, 70 years ago. But in many ways, does it not sound like our world, our country, our lives today? When you and I see what happens, the things that are happening, the natural disasters, the man-made ones, when we see what's happening, we could not have in our wildest dreams made those things up even just a few years ago. When society or our government tells you that after being born you can decide what gender you are, and therefore a 6'4", 200-pound man can play volleyball with a 5'3", 120-pound woman and then share a locker room and a shower together. When you see lawlessness and crime increase and all manner of terrible things happen, when you see cities rampaged by violence, when you see the southern border of our country in turmoil, and folks tell you the answer to those problems is to defund the police and to cut the number of folks who respond for our safety, and after all, the border is secure, do we wonder? When you see major news stories such as has been on all the networks the last few days about the horrible fires in California, and you're told that the reason for those fires is climate change and not forestry management, not getting rid of underbrush, not the fact that there was no water in many of the hydrants and therefore what can the firemen do? When you and I see an outgoing president in our system of government, and thank God for our system of government, but when you see an outgoing administration deliberately trying to sabotage an incoming one rather than just simply leaving, as folks should have done through the years and usually did, when we see our leaders, secular and spiritual, saying some of the things that they said and doing some of the things they do. It was not but just a few days ago when Pope Francis, head of the Roman Catholic Church, a church that embraces the gospel, that identifies strongly with the birth of Jesus and his mother and the care that has been through the years of Catholic orphanages and schools and those kind of things. When you see this leader of that church addressing a group of young people in Asia and saying to them, all religions are a path to God, that they are just like different languages trying to express the divine. And you want to say, what? Maybe you saw some of the funeral for former President Jimmy Carter. I've met Jimmy Carter. I shook hands with him. I've had a conversation with him. I bought his book and got him to autograph it, and you know, not that we're intimate friends, but, and this is not a Republican Democrat thing I'm saying. During his time as president, the country was on hard times, and he reaped much of the blame, some of it deservedly so, and much of it not. But the country was in such a difficult time with the Arab oil embargo, and I know none of you are old enough to have been around in 1970s driving, but there were long lines of gas, and you could buy gas only every other day, and then only so much of it. And prices were astronomical, and there were shortages of so much, and between that and the inflation that was going on in the country, the turmoil over many American hostages held by Middle Eastern potentates and folks, relegated Mr. Carter to only one term. After his time as president, he became involved in a wonderful organization, Habitat for Humanity, helped build houses. You no doubt, and if you watch the news, have seen him, pictures of him and Rosalind, his wife, in ball caps and driving nails and helping to build housing for folks who needed that benefit. He was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. And when he was appointed to the Naval Academy, coming from the little, I can't remember the name of the county, but the little town of Plains, Georgia, where he was a minority. There were more black people in that county than white people. When he was appointed to the Naval Academy, he asked for and received as his roommate a young black midshipman because he said, I've been a minority and perhaps I can help him adjust to his role as a minority. As he grew up after his time as a nuclear engineer on America's submarine fleet, he went back to Plains, became a farmer, became active locally, became a governor, and eventually, you know the story, became president of the United States. His reputation and record as a benevolent human being, which he was in his time as a Sunday school teacher and a deacon in his church, expressed his Christian faith and his belief. And I want to say to you this, I did not get to see all of the funeral, saw some of it, watched some of it on the news, saw bits and pieces of it. I was troubled by one of the pieces of music, the song Imagine. Maybe you're not familiar with it. It's written by John Lennon, one of the four Beatles. The president chose this to be played at his service. Here are some of the words to that song. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. And a little bit farther down this line, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. The conventional wisdom and the understanding, if that's the right word, of this song is that it's almost a theme song of folks who are atheists. Now, I say that to say this. Jimmy Carter, like Bob, and like you, has much to answer for. But would not it have been more consistent? Do you see I'm trying to paint a picture of best and worst, brightest and darkest, in and out contrast? Would it not have been more in keeping with his Christian principles to have had, rather than the song which says, there's no heaven or hell, a song like nothing, what can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Would that not have expressed his Christian beliefs? Jesus had much to say about heaven. Jesus had much to say about hell. Jesus had much to say about something worth living for and something worth dying for. And that dying for, Jesus said, was dying to follow me. Take up your cross daily and follow me. Something will trouble you. So here's where I'm going with all this, my friends. The question for believers is this: what do we do? Listen to these words from the book of Exodus, chapter 13, beginning with verse 20. After leaving Succoth, this is a place where the Israelites had camped after they came out of Egypt on their exodus, getting away from Pharaoh, trying to follow God, trying to be made into a nation, into a people. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. You know, it took them 40 years to make what should have been about a 7 or 10-day trip. But their disobedience, their wandering, their failure to follow God got them in a lot of water, a lot of hot water, a lot of trouble. And it can for me, and it can for you. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that it could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Okay, I know that's a physical act. I know that's a practical thing. I know that that's something that was going on, but there is, my friends, a very real and deep and meaningful spiritual application for you and me about this, about the then and about the now. There are 2 points. First of all, be awake. The Israelites literally had to be awake, did they not, to follow the cloud? And sometimes God wanted them to travel at night, so they had to be awake to do that. And I know some folks can sleep off. You hear people, I've been reading some history books about the war between the states, and there are several accounts of where men became so fatigued and had such long distances to march that they marched almost to sleep. You and I may have been in that half days and don't do it behind the wheel. What I'm saying here is this text tells us, first of all, be awake. Literally awake, of course, but be awake to follow God, who the book says here in this place was standing in front of them and never left. God is standing in front of us today through his word, through his ultimate revelation in Jesus, through what he says to us in so many ways, through songs such as the children's, through the songs you and I sing, through, I hope, the preaching of the word, the Sunday school lessons. And I missed Sunday school this morning. I hope you did. We probably could have had it, but to be safe and you know all that. Be awake. Be awake to what's going on. Jesus says to be as sly as a fox and as gentle as a lamb. Can you do both of those? Well, Jesus says you can. Be awake. Be awake to what's going on. And secondly, look behind those clouds in your life. Those issues that I mentioned when I first began speaking, and others, are clouds in your lives. But you know, there's an interesting thing about clouds. They come in different shapes. They come in different sizes. They come in different colors. You and I saw the other day the dark clouds of the almost snow of the century. On beautiful, bright spring and summer days, we look up and see the soft, white, puffy cumulus clouds. We sometimes see those streaky stratus and nimbus clouds. There are all kinds of clouds because there are all kinds of things in your life and mine. But there is an interesting thing about those clouds, my friends. You may never have thought about this, but the interesting thing is that we need those clouds. If you and I were to step out into God's good earth and there were no clouds in the sky, we would be burned by the sun. Without shade, without the cooling that comes from the clouds and other places, but without the shade, we would be consumed. Without clouds, there'd be no lavish sunsets. Have you seen some of them recently? You may know the old saying, red sky at morning, sailors take warning. Red sky at night, sailors delight. Now, none of us sail vessels or whatever, but the point is that they are beautiful at night. They're God's signature. Without clouds, there'd be no magnificent sunrises. There'd be no beneficial rain. There'd be no beautiful landscapes. There'd be no glorious appearance of the handiwork of the Master in the sky. The same is true, my friends, with the clouds of life. When those clouds come, Bob gets discouraged. Do you? And I know up here I shouldn't. What I've got to do is move the up here to the here and put them together. But we do get discouraged. There are clouds in life. Jesus did not say, you know, as you go along through life, could be occasionally something you don't like will happen. He said, in this life, you will have clouds. But behind those clouds, my friends, and this is the good news, behind those clouds, God is still present. And he can use those clouds in our lives to bring us unexpected blessings to our souls. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote these lines years ago. He said, be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the cloud is the sun still shining. All of us experience clouds in our lives, my friends. Sometimes they are small. Sometimes they are dark. Sometimes they are gray, kind of half white and half dark. Sometimes they are major and sometimes they are minor. And what's minor to you may be major to someone else. But whatever the clouds are in your life today, ask Jesus, the light of the world, to not necessarily drive the clouds away, but to help you look behind them, where he always is, and to see his glory and his plans for you. I have plans for you, the Master says, plans not to hurt you, but plans to prosper you. When the clouds come, if we let him, as the hymn says, page 340, he'll hide our soul in the midst of his love. I simply ask you, if there are any clouds in your life today, give them to the Lord, whatever they may be, and know that he's quite capable of handling them.